Starting recording. Recording has begun. And I will maybe, before I jump into what I did, I would be interested in Nicole and Marcus. I haven't spoken to you guys, so yeah.
Cool. I'll go first.
Go for it.
So I've only been about for a couple of days this week as well, but I had a look at some bits and pieces. I was looking at Lottie, but for some reason, like, their website doesn't load up properly for me. But they are gonna start having like a Rive style animation editor soon, so I've signed up for that, and we'll see when that turns up.
But I thought their thing was like the thing I thought was interesting about it. They you can use sort of After Effects to animate and then export.
I need to have a play with it, but yeah, like I said, I just couldn't even, like, I have a login, but it just gets stuck on like a loading page on the website. Every page does, so I need to, like, I was trying different web browsers, but yeah, I'll try again. And yeah, I'll see about that plugin. You also wanted me to have a look at Origami as well, which was like a prototyping tool, but it's actually only available on Mac. So
yeah, I don't remember that one. Was it like, I can't remember the deal with it. It was slightly more kind of like animation-y and slightly more than Figma, right?
But I did find one which I think, Paul, you've used, ProtoPie. Which was awesome.
I really like it, and they've I keep getting announcements that they're doing more and more interesting stuff. But I don't. Yeah, I suppose a lot of this stuff is like good for prototyping ideas. But if you want to create something or put something into a bit more of a production level, you know, like, it's great for that.
I couldn't find any way of exporting to anything useful. Like, it is just for prototyping, but it's still cool, like, just for getting some ideas down, for because they've got in there triggers for, like, you know, pinching and like planning and just gestural stuff you can start playing with.
It's got a lot of like logic stuff as well, so yeah, depending on certain scenarios, if statements and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was cool. So yesterday and today I've spent getting Cooksy's mocap animations into this program called Cascado, which basically adds physics and does like physics calculations based on animation that you import into it, which I'm still getting the hang of, but I've then got the workflow to get those FPXs out to Unreal Engine, and putting those on the MetaHuman. And it still requires a fair amount of tweaking, just because like the arms will be a bit too close together and stuff like that, but it's working. And I've got like 2 of the sitting animations like in our system, so I can show you guys those quick if you want. But I still need to do more work on the animation smoothing and stuff. But yeah, let me check. So this is nervous Alex, which needs some work. You can see like his hands should be crossed over. So I just need to do a bit more work on that one. But that's fine. And then yeah, we've just got this sort of more casual seated with armrests, so that's working fine. Don't know if it'll let me. I need to fix the loop because it jumps a little bit when it's supposed to loop, but But yeah, that's it. Otherwise, it's working, which is good. So yeah, that's with the lip syncing on top. All seems okay. So yeah, that's me.
Is that with the updated stuff that I did? I can't remember.
Not with your new camera, no.
Okay, cool.
I'll merge that all in.
Yeah, that's quite a big change. I can't remember where we got to and where I left that. But yeah, that finds the exact eye line and sets the height and the angle and everything. So no matter if they're sat or standing, it doesn't matter. Like it will just spawn the camera in and be in exactly the right place every time with adjustment.
But
yeah. Although I do need to switch over to the other type of camera, not the cine camera, at some point. I also do have a slight update on the pixel streaming aspect of that. I haven't done it yet, but I've got a contract from the Convey guys. They have their own pixel streaming system, and I need to sign that. I've checked it off with Barry, actually. He seems to be okay. It's like a non-commercial thing. And then we can get it into testing. And last week, the week before last, I did last week did a bunch of testing with people internally, which was quite good. But I'm keen to do it with more people. So once it's online, that will be a lot easier, and then I can share it out to people on this call and people that aren't in the office. But I'll show you. I can show you Ollie actually at some point when you're in. You can have a go on it.
Yeah, that'd be
good. Cool. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Who, me? Oh,
yeah.
Oh, Margaret.
Unless you have more to say. Cool.
No, all done.
No worries.
Yeah, I can go now. So screen. First, I will just show this, which I'll go through quickly because it's a little bit of a repeat of what I said last week, but I hopefully maybe a little bit more makes sense now because I've laid it out visually. But this is basically laying out my thought process of how to use generative agents to create in like the Swipe game as an educational game, and I've basically laid it out as if there are 4 types of generative agents. There's a learning director, a narrative director, a storylet director, and then a character. There'll probably be like 6 or 8 characters, but those are the different types. And then there's the player, who is a human being. So these are basically like different instances of ChatGPT with a kind of a memory and a personality, and they're asked to reflect on their memories according to their personality and all of this kind of thing. And they're then asked or told various things in sequence. So at the start of the game, the learning director is asked what we need to see evidence of within this domain. If we give the Swipe game a domain of e-commerce or leadership or whatever, the learning director will be asked what competencies need to be addressed. This might pull from our lesson content. Then the narrative director is asked to come up with a 6-month narrative that could occur in e-commerce or in social media, etc., such as launching a new product or rebranding, and then to divide that up into 6 months and generate some potential ideas for storylets. Then the way that the Swipe game works is that it's a series of storylets, which are basically like little scenarios, like self-contained stories. That a metaphor is like an episode of a TV show where like you've got a season of a TV show, but then each episode has its own little story that is self-contained, but also contributes to the overall narrative. So for each storylet, the learning director will be asked what competencies do the learners still need to address. The narrative director will be given those competencies and asked to like pick or create a scenario that might involve those particular skills. And then that will be handed off to the storylet director, who will map out in detail what this storylet might look like, and the characters will then be told what the story, what the scenario is, what today's episode is about. Then like a storylet is then broken down further into cards. So for each card that we generate, each card that the player actually sees, based on the storylet that we're looking at, the storylet director will be asked which character is the most relevant to speak right now, and then that character will be asked to come up with some dialogue. You know, here's the scenario. You as the brand manager, what, you know, talk to me, give me some options, and let me choose from them. Like, come up with an A or B. Then that is handed to the player. This is the point where the player interacts and says, here's your choice, A or B. The player chooses A or B. The characters are told that decision. They all kind of commit it to memory. The narrative director is asked to reflect on, okay, how does this affect the narrative? Where do we go from here? And the learning director is asked what to reflect on, like how that decision reflects on the learner's understanding of the subject matter, of the competencies, and potentially commit it to memory for the end game report as like a highlight or a low light. That will loop and loop and loop until we get to the end of the storylet, at which point the narrative designer is asked to kind of sum up, here's what happened in today's episode, put that into his memory, so that he can then decide what the next storylet is going to be. Basically all of these agents are just kind of given a summary of what just happened so that they can commit it to memory, and that will affect their future kind of decisions. And then we'll go back to the end of the storylet. Once we get to the end of the storylet, we start the next storylet and go through about 24 of those by the end of the game. And then at the end of the game, the learning director is asked to provide a summary of the learner's understanding of the different competencies and any weak spots and so on. And the narrative designer can just give like a summary of the narrative that happened. I do have an example, which I'll get to in a second. But one thing, because I know, Paul, you asked last time about like worried about it going off in the weeds or like hallucinating and things like that. And I think that this storylet structure helps with that, because having like separating the narrative, separating the agents in this way, this is the benefit of doing that, because if you just had one ChatGPT instance, for example, you could very easily find yourself going down a rabbit hole based on the response and the way that the conversation goes. The learner could kind of like direct it down this really weird route. But the fact that each storylet is like a self-contained story, that once it finishes, it's handed back off to like the main narrative thread. And for the next storylet, we kind of like create a whole new storylet director that has no memory of what happened previously, is just told, here's what this storylet is about, and some background information on what's happened so far. But like the narrative director and the learning director are there to kind of make sure that things keep on track, so that we're not in just a unguided ChatGPT conversation that could go anywhere. We've got this learning director and narrative director who the player never directly interacts with, and they're, through their prompts and so on, they're told like to make sure that we stick to the competencies that we need to address and the narrative that we've come up with. And then the storylet director is given a little bit more freedom to kind of like see what happens, but only for like a short episode. And then the characters are given a lot of freedom to be engaging characters and so on. But I think that it's like a good balance of both things. Let me show you an example. This is a quick front end that I came up with, and this is generated. The blue ones are my prompts. But this is like I'm starting to put some of the jigsaw pieces in place. I've got like, this is a auto-generated character summary of Toto, James, Becky, Victoria. Those are 4 of our characters. I've seeded them with some personality, like random personality traits. I just came up with a big list, like detail-oriented, aggressive, and then it just like randomly picks them, gives it some memories in the same way, like just to seed this character of like, oh, he's really good, he's a mentor and a leader, he attends charity events. These are kind of like picked from a random list that I wrote, and then but ChatGPT kind of turns them into a character. And then I kind of like seed it with, I've written some events which I took from the Swipe game. The company wants to invest in digital retail media to communicate a brand message to a wide audience. And then, like, as the first example of the kind of process that I was talking about, that scenario is handed off to one of the characters and asked, you know, Becky is our search specialist. And Becky responds like, I suggest investing in digital retail media. We could also try guerrilla marketing. So I've told them to kind of come up with an A or B option. So then we would be presented like this card. I mean, the wording and so on, we can work on making it characterful and a bit more natural language and whatever. But the point is that she's come back with like 2 options, and those could be our left and right swipes, and so on and so forth down through different prompting events. James says we could look into companies who specialize in digital security, or alternatively, we could look into the latest tools available, you know, and so on. Paul, I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah, I don't know if you answered it. I was just thinking, based on their personality,
Yeah.
is there a wrong or right? So way, yeah, is there a wrong or right answer? So are they kind of, you know, because if they're coming in quite aggressive or they've got an aggressive personality, they may choose a particular card that is not the thing in that.
Well, that I mean, at this stage, I don't think that's in there, but that's definitely like a goal of it, is to really, like, it comes down to the prompts, and I just have to work that out over time. But basically, yeah, like maybe there would be an intern in the Swipe game that we wrote. Like, we have an intern character who's like maybe doesn't have the best ideas all the time, but bless him. And so like we kind of like we would create that particular character, or we have the CEO who's like very hot-headed and so on. Yeah, so when the player does choose left or right, that would then be handed off to like the learning designer or the narrative director, to be like, you know, was that a good choice or not? The prompts would be there to say, you know, come up with 2 choices. They may not be right and wrong. They might be a right and a wrong answer, or they might be 2 equally good answers. But it would also be given the 4 metrics that we have at the top and said, like, make sure that you're kind of like playing them off against each other. So maybe what, you know, if you've got traffic conversion rate, budget, try to pick 2 options that are like a bit difficult. So yeah, so I'm just, you know, cracking forward with that. Like I said, kind of building each of the jigsaw puzzles individually, and then at some point I'm going to merge them all together.
And is this still to kind of generate some static cards to then have a custom version of the game, or is this kind of more towards like custom interacting directly?
This would be like generated on the fly. Right. It would still be the same. The learner wouldn't know anything changed necessarily. Like, you're still just swiping left and right, but like once you swipe right, it would think for a minute and come back with the next card.
Yeah. And do you think that's the next step, or do you think there's an intermediary step of creating a static set using similar tools?
I think so. But one advantage of this approach is that we actually just move away from the yarn format, which was good for a human writer, but I think it's a little bit of a struggle for the bot, the LLM. Having said that, I think all of this work could be used for that kind of static generation anyway, because I still want to be asking the different characters for the different points of views, and I could just do that like towards a static process that then just gets fed into a kind of a yarn file output or something.
I think that's something for us outside of this really to talk about for the versions that we're looking at for whatever these client requests are, whether we go straight to this, whether this would be ready in time or whether it'd be it'd be better to do a static version. I can see a little bit of concern over that, an unchecked version. But yeah, to talk
I think
about, but it's cool.
If we were to like roll out a new swipe game, or we needed to build a new swipe game right now about some random topic, like we could use the AI stuff that the previous kind of version that I showed
that's
a
kind
few
of
weeks ago, as like a starting point, and give that to some human writers. I think it would still benefit that kind of workflow. So yeah, I think that's there already, really.
Okay, good to know.
And now how do I stop sharing? There we go. Cool, so that's me. Oh, Roberto, yes?
Yeah, I might miss some context, but I was wondering, how do you decide that it's the end of the conversation, so it's the end of the game?
Yeah, that's a good question. The swipe game as a broader narrative does have a pretty defined structure of like 4 storylets per month and 6 months per game. But the question of like how do you decide when a storylet ends is something that you would have to kind of hand over to the AI to a certain degree. The generative agents library that I'm using in LangChain, it does have that functionality. Every time you ask an agent to speak, it also gives an opinion of whether it thinks that's the end of the conversation or not. Like it kind of naturally tries to draw it to a close, and also feeds you a Boolean of like, do I think the conversation should end now? So you can do that kind of thing of just asking the AI to kind of naturally come to an end. You could also just hard code it of like, okay, we've had 4 cards now, just wrap it up kind of thing.
Sure. And does the agent provide a yes, no response, or does it provide a numeric value of something like probability that the conversation has to end?
It actually just provides a yes, no value, but that's not a bad shout to just kind of give it maybe more of a confidence value, which is probably just something you could prompt into it.
Okay, thanks.
Ollie?
Oh, yeah. So I guess I'm just looking just for a bit more context to this, because this is the first time I joined the meeting. So that kind of flow that you were going through earlier, and you had the different agents. Do they essentially, I guess, just perform a different role, sort of within the game? And the reason you're using them is so that, well, just to sort of keep the whole thing on track, basically, instead of going off on a sort of a wild tangent.
To keep them on track, yes, and also each of the agents can be prompted to have a different personality and a different memory. So certain agents might remember something and other agents won't, which allows you to kind of like control what the context is, what context they have access to. So very much, we want the characters, we want the text that is generated on the cards to be quite lighthearted and characterful and everything like that. And to have that at the same time as kind of like being very strict about the learning objectives that we're trying to achieve, and like pulling out the right things from a case study and all that kind of thing, like that's too much to just ask of one LLM. So that's why you kind of like have multiple ones basically, and they all feed prompts to each other. Like behind the scenes, they're all like connected to each other. They generate their own prompts, which they send off to a different, the storylet director will generate and send a prompt to the character, who will then respond to that prompt, and that's the response that we feed into the card kind of thing. And that's the way it kind of works.
Yeah, that sounds very cool. And so the idea is that the swipe game doesn't need to be written by a person and it's just going to sort of generate. You just feed in the topic, and it kind of generates.
Yes, that's the thing that I'm exploring. I think ultimately we'll probably settle on something where we feed it a whole bunch of scripts or something like, or something like a PDF. Just give it a, I don't know what, but like 50-page PDF, and say, you know, pull out case studies and things from this PDF and make a swipe game about this. But at the moment, as a sort of MVP, you can just give it the 2 words, you know, digital marketing, and it will come up with a swipe game.
Amazing.
Cheers.
Yeah, I've got a question. So, how I don't know whether you've done this yet, or maybe this is the next step. How do you put value to each card? So, like, as I remember playing the swipe game in the past, every time you made a decision, you would spend a certain amount of money, and then the 4 parameters would move around.
Yeah.
Is that something that's designed in the Storylets yet? Or
not yet, because definitely I'm tinkering on this piece of the jigsaw, this piece of the jigsaw.
Okay, cool.
But like that, basically, like, yeah, we will have access to, the agents will have access to the 4 metrics, like the learning designer, and some of these, not the characters themselves, but the designer agents will know that they're in this game that has these 4 metrics, and you want to come up with a scenario that is related to these 4 metrics, and then they're told the character has come up with this decision. You know, how do those 2 how does decision A and how does decision B relate to those 4 metrics that we're doing? Or maybe it would be better, we'll see, but maybe it's better to do it the other way, and the learning designer comes up with the A and B decision and just tells that to the character for the character to give their little like spin on it. But yeah, so definitely those metrics will be fed into the prompt at some stage in the chain.
right. Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, that's me done then.
That's really cool, really interesting. I think it might be worth, I'll talk about this separately with you, Marcus, like doing a sort of video on what what generative agents are, why they're good, because I think that has a lot of implication actually for future just ideas really, but
yeah,
other games.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the it was kind of visually noticeable in that diagram that I did, but I like this idea that like the human player is just one of 5 agents, like all of these agents are making decisions, and the player, in this case, we've funneled it into this specific A or B decision, but it's like that the player is just inhabiting this sort of simulated world in a way.
That's really smart as well, because when you think about it, one, that allows for sort of scalability in adding other players at whatever level, but also thinking about where the player could take over from the AI in one of the other levels, whether they direct a game or whether they direct a storylet or something, and what that means in regards to their experience and what they practice and learn. Yeah, there's a lot to think about in that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, I'll show you a little bit of what I've done this week. I won't keep it too long, but I'll show you a bit. Where is the share screen? Share my screen. I'm going to share it without sound actually, because I've got like video stuff, but it won't play back nicely. But essentially, we went to this conference, and I kind of made it my mission just to make like a cool video essentially. But I ended up doing lots of like little interviews with people, and it was cool. It was cool to like see kind of like products and things that you would see just like sent to you that you probably wouldn't like otherwise like go on and have a look at. Sorry, I'll make you bigger so I can see all of you. But in this like scenario, it was like, oh, I'm going to chat to you and find out more about like this thing that I probably would have clicked past or whatever. So a few like interesting ones in particular. So these guys were doing a platform which is all around like micro interactions. Maybe I've got it here actually. Is it? Sorry, here we go. So this is their website. It's probably easy to show it this way. So very much like the work that Alessandra has been working on actually, and Roberto actually at your team in kind of AI powered interactions. So like all of these different like question types and interaction types and like integrations with language, like different languages and integrations with other platforms. But essentially kind of the stuff that we've been looking at, like multiple choice questions, like word cloud stuff, like they're kind of billing it as like, hey, you're doing like a presentation or you're doing some in classroom learning or live learning. This is like a little thing that you could pop up in the middle of your presentation to like have some engagement. So they've kind of focused it on that, but I just thought it was kind of interesting because it's like, well, I don't know, there's like way more to it than that. There's way more potential. So yeah, I might get in contact with them again, or like set up a meeting or something, because like these guys were tiny. Like this was just one of the little tiny like startup booths, so they might have something that's of value to us that we're like, hey, we'll just buy you and integrate stuff in. This one, I can't find the website for these guys, but essentially they were doing a similar thing but incorporating like neuroscience. So I thought that was kind of something where like all these different startups were maybe coming to the same end result. So these guys were also doing like soft skills, like interactions and things, but they were coming up from a very like academic background and like, what are the best things to ask? What are the best kind of interactions to do based on the science of neuroscience, essentially. And then the other one that was kind of similar. Well, actually, I'll show you this guy. No, not that guy. Here we go. Yeah. So this guy was doing the project that I've been working on, like this kind of like conversational AI character using Unreal Engine, using some of the similar tech. So I ended up doing like a whole interview with him, and I'll share that out later. He was like super interesting. He was basically doing my job, or is it? Yeah, I can't remember. Like his title is like innovation or research director for this company. So yeah, that was kind of cool. And he had like loads of other AI stuff as well. Like all of their stuff was kind of app based. And some of it was like speaking directly with AI, or other stuff was like recording yourself and then getting analyzed on that, similar to the thing that Paul was experimenting with, like kind of like practicing presentations. And then these guys were kind of doing another similar thing that I was looking at last year or earlier in the year with that like Sidekick app concept. They had come up with like this app essentially, which is like just a social media type app, but for like learning content. Well, not just learning content actually. They said it could be for anything, but it turns out they get a lot of learning clients. So yeah, they'd been doing all these different
reverse engineer social media. Yeah.
Kind of interaction types. So, for instance, let's have a look at what he says.
We try to hold the attention of our users by using short and snappy content and changing the type of content. So what you just saw is that a card comes alive.
Yeah. So his whole thing was like they had a lot of theory behind how long a piece of media should be to keep people's attention, and he was basically saying it shouldn't be longer than 30 seconds. Like no bit of content should be longer than 30 seconds, whether it's a video, a little interaction, or what it is. You've got to be able to break it down. And I don't necessarily agree with all of that, but I do quite agree with it in terms of like video, especially. I just think the idea of anyone's attention span of like, hey, I've got to learn this thing. I'm going to sit and watch a video for 20 minutes. It's like, I don't think that's a good way of learning. and these guys had a lot of stats to back that up, a lot of metrics and all the stuff, which they would because they're trying to sell their thing. But yeah, I thought that was worth showing. So yeah, I'll share this whole video. This is just like a video about the trip and things that I learned and stuff. But yeah, those were like the sort of standout ones of like people that I'll get back in contact with. And again, these guys were tiny. They were like 7 people company. This was kind of maybe a slightly bigger company, maybe sort of Circus Street size. And then these guys pretty small, like about 5 of them, I think. Small kind of stuff. So yeah. I'll leave it there. But that's me for the week really. I haven't really done much else, but I think it's worth going, and maybe more of us going to some of these things in terms of Marcus and Nicole. I know you guys are pretty good at it generally anyway, but I haven't been. Yeah, it was a weird conference, like this HR thing. So I wasn't really expecting to get much from, but digging in, going in with the camera, people are actually surprisingly willing to divulge information about their what they're working on, how it works.
I think definitely go trying to get tickets to SIGGRAPH or ones like that where you get to see a lot of the new video, and I suppose a lot of AI stuff. But
yeah, maybe I'm less bothered about the video stuff and like VFX stuff, because I sort of think like, cool, yeah, you can do new VFX, but it's the sort of the stuff that Marcus is learning about, really. That's I think that's the interesting bit, is like interactive experiences and new stuff, even games and stuff. It's a lot there.
Yeah,
But,
just to mention, like, I've been just messaging and trying to get a call or something with two people. One is a lady that we met, Paul, at the Playful Learning conference. She was Scottish. She's up in Glasgow. And do you remember there was a room with like 3 different games? There was like a card game, and one on like an iPad that was really not very good. We didn't like it, and she was trying to make the point that it was deliberately not very good. Do you remember this?
Give me one more bit of detail.
I don't remember. Anyway, she was really nice, and she's like doing her whole thing. She was doing some kind of thesis or whatever on like the workflow of creating an educational app or an educational game, actually. I remember. How do you involve the SMEs? How do you involve the game designers? How does that work? So I've just been like in touch with her and hopefully chat with her soon. And then also I went to it was more like an art thing at the at UAL, the Creative Computing Institute there. And there was a guy, he was meant to talk, but it got cancelled. But he does stuff about using LLMs for game generation. And I think he's like just signed up to some like shit hot startup as some director of whatever. So I don't know if there's much work potential there, but he'd still be a really interesting guy to chat with. Yeah, but that's just a small update from me on that kind of topic of talking to people.
Yeah, I think I'd like to do more, well, internally and externally, like interviews and stuff, and kind of, yeah, it's a cool way to kind of like get information and share it and
yeah
stuff like that. Ooh. All right,
cool beans.
And anything else from anyone else?
No.
Then I shall leave you.
Cool.
And I shall see you next week.
Bye.
See you later. Bye, everyone.
Have
a nice weekend.
That's all.